Today's episode is brought to you by Leeward Elite. Leeward Elite is the solution to your technology and computer needs. Don't you deserve a better technology experience, a worry-free experience, a cost-effective experience? Leeward Elite members enjoy peace of mind, greater business productivity, and unlimited support. That's right, unlimited support. Contact a Leeward Elite concierge at leewardelite.com. That's leewardelite.com. And folks, I've gotten to know the Leeward Group, and not only do they provide outstanding IT solutions, they're also a very socially conscious group. They give back to their community in so many ways. I highly recommend contacting Leeward for any of your IT or consulting needs. I thank them for sponsoring and hope you enjoy today's episode.
Looking to buy, sell, or grow your business to position it for a sale? As the owner and managing partner of Sun Acquisitions, Domenic Rinaldi has personally been involved in over 300 M&A transactions. He has seen and done it all, consulting with large and small businesses across a broad range of industries. On M&A Unplugged, he'll interview buyers, sellers, and their advisors about their experiences scaling, selling, and acquiring businesses. On every episode, you will get key learnings, but most importantly, you will be better prepared for your own acquisition or sale. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
Jim Piper is the Executive Vice President of Matot, the primary commercial dumbwaiter manufacturer in the U.S. All right, some of you may not know what dumbwaiter is, and just in case, I looked it up. I wanted to make sure I was being technically correct here. And the definition is a small elevator for carrying things, especially food and dishes, between the floors of a building. Jim, I guess that's generally right, but they're used for a lot more than that, correct?
They are. They're an interesting product, and they get used in a lot of very interesting and behind-the-scenes applications. It's a relatively commercial-based, heavy-duty product for moving material between floors of a building. The applications can be relatively mundane. They can be used in restaurants to move food or dirty dishes between multi-story restaurants. But we also get into interesting applications like healthcare, where we might provide food service throughout a new hospital that's being built. They've got to feed a couple hundred patients 3 times a day, and they use dumbwaiters to carry that food between floors.
Very cool.
We also get into manufacturing operations, a lot of clean room applications, and even buildings such as the new Apple headquarters out in Cupertino have 20 of our dumbwaiters in them for moving food between floors for all the engineers so they can eat sushi at all hours of the day.
Making sure they don't leave their desk.
That's right.
Don't decrease any productivity there, right?
That's right.
Interestingly enough, though, I when I was looking up the definition, I came across the British definition of dumbwaiters. And man, I couldn't believe it. It's a movable table, typically with revolving shelves, used in a dining room. Now, why such a narrow definition? It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, it's funny because one of the first applications in the U.S. dates to Monticello and Thomas Jefferson's home. And the term dumbwaiter actually comes from the definition of dumb being mute. And so they wanted a way to transport food from a basement kitchen to a meeting space in their home where they didn't have to have wait staff listening in on their meetings. So the dumb waiter is actually a quiet waiter, not dumb as in stupid as we may assume today.
Yeah, those horrible definitions, right?
Right,
wow.
right.
Let me just complete this intro, but that was a great sidebar. Matot is actually a family-owned business. This is really going to blow your mind. It's been in continuous operation since 1888.
That's right.
It's a 4th-generation business, which is absolutely amazing given that only 3% of all family businesses survive the 4th generation. Jim is part of the executive management team and responsible for the long-term strategic planning of the company. I find the rest of this pretty interesting, Jim. It says that you're there to ensure there's a 5th generation of owners. No pressure, huh?
No pressure at all. So that's when I was hired, and I should maybe back up a step just to your earlier point. Yes, we are. We've been in business since 1888 in Chicago the entire time. We're the true definition of Chicago-based manufacturing. We got our start making ice boxes So that was the early days in Chicago, serving the taverns and restaurants. Today, we make commercial dumbwaiters. We are a fourth generation company. There are two sisters that own the company today. So we're also a woman-owned business. And when I was hired, it was pretty clear to me that the goal was to carry the company from the fourth generation, Ann and Cece Matot, to the fifth generation. And between them, they've got 5 kids. And we're not there yet in terms of timing, but that is the ultimate goal, to carry this company to the fifth gen and beyond.
Man, that's a little bit of pressure right there.
It is.
One of the ways to get there is to make sure that you're staying relevant. And as a result of that, the company has really tried to stay on the cutting edge. You're no stranger to growing the business and growing in the ways that you need to. You had done an acquisition in 2009, which combined Matot with Atlas Elevator, bringing together 2 of the largest manufacturers. And then more recently, you led the effort, which is really what we're going to probably spend most of our time talking about today. You led the effort for Matot in acquiring Kelair products as part of a diversification play. And we did a fabulous job because I got to see that firsthand. So why don't we start there, Jim? Why don't you tell us how that acquisition has gone, the integration, and then we'll work our way back to what got you to the point where you decided you were going to diversify and look at some acquisitions.
Sure. The integration has gone extremely well. We're 3 years into it now. And I think we're all surprised because we weren't sure at first, how it was going to go. We have an excellent team in place, but with a lot of, your help and the help of our executive team, we pulled off quite a trick in acquiring a company that's now serving to bring in at least a third of our top line revenue.
Wow.
We've added 6 additional full-time staff members to our crew, and it's gone extremely well. All of the company's operations were consolidated into our Bellwood location here in Chicago. That process took approximately 6 months to complete, but now we're running as one company. Initially, it was you run 2 companies in parallel when you bring them inside and you work on the integration, but it's going extremely well.
That is great. We're going to catch up on all of the elements that went into integration, but let's go back to the beginning. When you were all first sitting around the table talking about acquisition being a possibility, talk us through how the team got together and got comfortable with that. And then, what were your first couple of steps? Did you go out and start talking to companies? What did you do? What were the first couple of things you did once you decided?
A lot of it, honest to God, is dumb luck. Again, we have a great team. We sat down 5 years ago when I first joined the company and worked on some strategic planning efforts to grow the business. We knew that in order to get the company to the fifth generation, we couldn't sit still. We had to grow. It was either going to be through organic growth of the dumbwaiter business, and for that, we'd have to venture into new markets outside of North America, or it was going to be through a strategic acquisition. We dabbled in the organic growth. We attempted to do some business in Central America and South America. That didn't work well. So we went to plan B and began looking at acquisitions. And full disclosure, I had never done an acquisition before, had very little experience with it. I've always been more of an operations, business development type person in my career. And one evening I was sharing a ride home with a gentleman who had recently bought a business. I asked him how he did it. I asked him who he worked with, and I began making phone calls. Again, very serendipitous timing, but that ultimately led me to you and Sun Acquisitions.
Let me go back to your organic growth first. So you tried to break into South America. What didn't work with that strategy? What happened?
So we were attempting to sell our commercial dumbwaiter products into a market that we were very unfamiliar with. We hired an outside sales professional who grew up in Panama and went to school in the United States and was an outside sales hunter to help us grow that business south of the border. And what we quickly found was that our product is a well-engineered, over-engineered product for heavy industrial use. And the marketplace in Central and South America was asking for a much lower cost, lower quality product. And in order to meet those ends, we were going to have to modify our design to a point that we weren't simply comfortable either manufacturing it and or selling it, primarily due to some liability concerns. So we faced a lot of stiff competition. We gave this a good go for 18 months, but ultimately decided to pull out of that marketplace.
So then that didn't work. The management team got back together again. And was it obvious that acquisitions was the path, or was there some resistance, or was everybody on board?
Everybody was on board. We knew it was going to be the next step. We didn't know exactly, what the mechanics of it were going to look like. But we know what we're good at. And a commercial dumbwaiter is a highly engineered, commercial metal fabricated product. And so we knew that if we could find an acquisition in that type of space that relied upon steel manufacturing, cutting, forming, welding, assembly of steel product of some sort, light assembly, if we could find something in that space, that we'd be successful. We also recognized that we had capacity on our shop floor that was being underutilized. And again, that led us down the acquisition route fairly quickly.
So, Jim, when you first met with our firm, you'd come in and I think you pretty well knew that you wanted to diversify. So you didn't want to go out and acquire another dumbwaiter company. I think your initial comments to us were, we've got this spare space and we think bringing in a different product line, bending metal, because that's what you guys do, right? I mean, dumbwaiters is, really forming metal, right?
That's right.
In different shapes, but, still in the bending metal space, but let's bend some metal, but let's diversify beyond dumbwaiters. So how did you arrive at that conclusion and what were those discussions like?
Pretty spot on. We know what we're good at. We know what makes us successful as a dumbwaiter company, but we also knew that in our industry, we sort of looked upstream and downstream at vendors and competitors and really couldn't identify any easy acquisition targets. There's been a lot of consolidation in our marketplace, in the elevator industry in which we play. And many of the tier one suppliers, such as ourselves, of our size and scale, have already been absorbed into larger companies like the Otises and the Schindlers and the Kones of the world, much larger companies. And so there really wasn't a whole lot of fruit for the picking. Downstream in the supplier components, a lot of that is overseas manufactured parts, and again, didn't lend itself to the type of business model we were looking for. So we knew that if we could find something in the metal fabricated space, light assembly space, electromechanical space, all manufacturing capacities that we have today in-house, that we had a fairly good chance of being successful.
So maybe you can talk to my community about, the process, so what happened from there? So management team was on board. The company had previously done an acquisition back in 2006 prior to you joining the company. So was there anything that happened in that earlier acquisition that filtered into this? And then talk about, the process that you undertook internally to then ramp up to do this acquisition.
Yeah, that initial acquisition was much more of a merger than it was an acquisition. It was an acquisition, but again, it was a like for like acquisition. They were our number one competitor in the U.S. They also happened to be based in Chicago. They were another small business, another family-run business that had been through, I think they were in their third generation when we acquired them. So that was much more synergistic. It made sense. It was easier. It was a complementary product, much like the product that we were already manufacturing. When we approached Sun Acquisitions, it was relatively blue sky. And what I found fascinating and comforting from our first meetings was that when meeting with you and your marketing team, your initial feedback was pushback to say, okay, we get who you are. We understand what you want to do. However, before we engage, we're going to step away and do our own research to ensure that there's enough activity, deal flow, market space out there for the type of company and activity that we're looking to go after. And that was extremely reassuring to both, me and the executive team. Again, because this was relatively new. This process was relatively new. And knowing that more or less you wouldn't take our business unless there was a fairly good chance of success was extremely reassuring.
Yes, let's talk about that because that's a key learning. And I certainly don't want this to be a commercial about Sun Acquisitions. I mean, I really want to stay focused on the process, but it is a key and core tenet of how we approach client and buy-side campaigns because you were retaining us at that point in time. And so to peel back the onion on this a little bit, what we do in a typical situation like this is, we'll look at what your goals and objectives are. And if they seem reasonable to us, we go out and we research the market. And in your case, as you know, we researched all of the metal fabrication opportunities that we thought fit within the window that you're going to be engaging for you. When you're doing that, you're really making a market. And when you're making a market, there have to be enough targets.
Right.
It's not just a pure numbers game because there's so much more that goes into it, but you have to know that there's enough there that you're going to have enough opportunities to bring to the table. And in your case, there were, especially back, here in Chicago, there are, good number of metal fabricators. So I can't imagine though you would have thought that you'd be in the business you're in today with that acquisition, right?
No, I mean, and again, we were fairly open to do new ideas, and our geographic range, was wide enough that you're right. We had a wide variety of opportunities present themselves, over the course of the 6 months that we were engaged. And we can speak to some of those. We came across companies that were selling lighting products and signs and other complementary elevator products that we weren't even aware of. And it just was a wealth of different industries to learn about, to investigate, to do a lot of research into. And it's not as if we had our pick, but it gave us an opportunity to look outside what was very normal for Matot's day to day.
So we got to the point where we were comfortable with, good target list to go after. If I remember correctly, there were a little over 250 targets on the list, right?
That's right.
So our job as your M&A advisor was to go out and, see who in that target list was interested in selling. And so we went out, we did a little initial vetting, and then we brought you opportunities when people raised their hands. So if you could talk about what you went through to research, and then maybe some of the meetings, maybe not the specifics of the meetings, but how you prepared for those meetings, how those meetings went, what were some of the key takeaways in that process of interviewing targets, I think would be really helpful for everybody.
I think the first few were difficult because we really didn't know what questions to ask. And it's also, as a small business, there is a reluctancy that we can relate to really share detailed financial information about your company or the way that you're running your company. But ultimately, as a buyer, you're trying to get those answers. So it's learning how to creatively get to the motivation of the seller as to why they're selling their company. And then ultimately, you're digging around as best you can in a methodical yet polite and friendly way to better understand the business over a phone call. And you get better at it as you go. And I think having an experienced broker alongside is very helpful. But ultimately, it's a small business talking to another small business, and you're trying to be relatable, trustworthy, and honest about your motivation as a buyer and understand their motivation as a potential seller. So we got better as we went. And I believe we had phone conversations or interviews with at least 8, if not 10, potential sellers. And part of the filtering that you're thinking of all the time is whether or not they're actually a motivated seller or if they're an owner who simply wants to understand the value of their business. And with the help of yourself and Son, we were able to get to the bottom of that relatively quickly with some of these sellers. But you do get better as you go. And I think, once we had momentum, once we began to understand what was important to us in terms of understanding revenue, company culture, privately held family council issues, the process began to move relatively quickly.
Yeah, Jim, you just gave the M&A Unplugged podcast community 2 really key nuggets here. I'm going to spend a minute talking about those because they're so important. When you're a buyer out in the marketplace looking to acquire something, these 2 things really matter. One, understanding the motivation of the seller is critical, and really diving deep. They might say they want to retire or they're burnt out, but you really have to dig down deeper than that. For example, an owner might say they're ready to retire. As an M&A advisor, my next question might be, well, do you have plans for retirement? What are you going to do? And I always love the owners who have a story for me. Yeah, I've got a ranch or I've got a summer home or whatever, and I've got 5 grandkids and I can't wait for them to come spend their summers with me. That tells me that owners really got their head wrapped around selling the business. They're thinking the next stage. So that's really key. And then the second nugget you threw out was this initial, what I call dance with an owner of a business. People, are reluctant to release a lot of detailed information. And so having a dance where, they get comfortable with you, you get comfortable with them is perfectly okay. You don't have to dive in and get all the information up front. It's way more important that the parties to the transaction really like and respect each other. Because if there's like and respect, and I even, metaphorically go as far as saying if there's love,
Right.
if there's love there, you've got a way to get a transaction done and overcome all the pitfalls and potholes that are inherent in doing a transaction. So those are really two key nuggets, Jim, and thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah, and we refer to your first point as the sailboat test. If the owner's already bought the sailboat, we know they're ready to go.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. Can I steal that from you?
You can steal that.
I'm doing this over 15 years. I don't have that term. Wow,
Right.
I love it.
So that's the sailboat test. But to your second point, you're right. We get calls every day as a small business. There's a lot of deal flow out there, and we're a lower middle market company ourselves, and we get approached by brokers. And so we know what it's like to get these calls. We can relate to the stress that's involved sometimes when the letter writing campaigns hit or the phone calls begin, to really knowing, whether or not you can trust the other side.
Yeah. So Jim, let's skip a little forward here in your transaction. So you had, I think you're right, it was 8 to 10 conversations, which ultimately led to a few meetings. And then you had a meeting with the owner of the company that you actually wound up acquiring. What do you remember about that meeting? How did that meeting feel? And I know it wasn't one of the early ones, so maybe you got a little rust off, but talk about how that meeting went and then what ensued from there.
I remember it well because the owner agreed only to meet us after hours. I remember being extremely dark when we pulled up to his shop. I remember the owner being at a table in his front lobby with very few lights on because, again, it's a first meet and greet. And there was a bit of reluctancy. There was a bit of apprehension, but also, excitement to finally have a discussion about, whether or not this is going to work. It's kind of like going on a blind date. So it began with a conversation, and it began like any other relationship. You're trying to get to know one another. It's all personalities coming together before we have a business chat. And the reason that the owner of the company we ultimately acquired agreed to meet us is because we went into this with our early conversations speaking to the importance of our family business. Again, coming in as a fourth generation, 130-year-old family-run business carries a lot of weight with it. And despite having other offers on the table over the years, what this owner appreciated was the fact that we were going to make an offer to all of his employees to maintain their employment. And that was what he wanted to hear. He wanted to know that everyone in his shop was going to have a job post-close if we went through with this deal. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other ins and outs of the deal making, but as it turns out, and sometimes it takes a while to dig around and find this, that was his primary concern.
Yeah.
We were going to reassure that to any business owner for the company we were going to acquire. We weren't doing anything different in this case, but that was what ultimately led us to meet one dark evening in the lobby of his shop to begin our discussions.
When you left that meeting, did you feel like, wow, this feels right? I like what I see. Did you sort of, see yourself acquiring that company that day?
I did. I like the owner a lot. We did hit it off well. We both have a fondness for manufacturing and operations. He grew up in the family business. His father was the first gen. He was the second gen. His father had passed away. He was running the company. He had been doing so for 10 or 15 years. But the other part of it was upon seeing his shop, upon seeing the product, I could immediately see through it that I knew we could make it. I knew we could build it. I knew we could engineer it. I knew we could fabricate it to the level of quality that they had been doing so for the past 30 years as a company. So immediately I felt that this is a product I understand. This is a product I can wrap my head around. I knew my executive team could wrap their head around it. And as important, I knew my owners could wrap their heads around how this product gets made. So we immediately felt very, very comfortable with this particular product line.
And so then maybe talk about the next couple of steps here. You started to do a little bit of discovery and ultimately submitted an offer and then got into diligence. So you could talk through that. And also, if you remember, there was an offer that was made on another business, and I would substantiate all day long that it was a very fair offer. But do you remember the owner coming back and saying, I want 5 times this?
We did. I mean, that, and again, you learn that was an owner that had not yet bought a sailboat.
Yeah, exactly right.
Right. So that was a young owner of a family run business who, again, in hindsight, was probably more interested in learning more about the value of his company than selling his company.
Yeah.
And when we approached him with our offer, it was a bit of a chuckle and a laugh. And he decided that at his age, he might as well just keep on working, which I don't think is uncommon. It was a very interesting business to us. And had we caught him at the right time or on the right day, perhaps there could have been a nice partnership there, but it wasn't the right deal. And that's fine. You learn. So yeah, we drafted a letter of intent, the company we ultimately acquired. And it's at this point that we began to bring in the experts. Relationships been built, the relationships maintained. But again, you start to build your team. And we had very good attorneys. We had very good accounting. We had a broker ready to help us through this step. And you simply begin to turn the crank. And it's arduous and it takes a lot of time. And again, you're stepping over some very delicate stones from both sides in sharing information that is relatively private to privately held companies. But the process at that point really becomes almost textbook. There's a lot of back and forth. There's some basic negotiation about sell price and terms. There's a ton of contractual detail. But again, you bring in experts that you're comfortable with, and the process is relatively painless.
During your diligence, did you find anything during the diligence that was material at all?
Nothing surprising in our case, no.
Yeah.
It was more simply us becoming comfortable with the way that we were going to finance the deal.
Right. And at the end of the day, you wound up doing the deal for the offer that you had originally put in front of the owner, correct?
Yes. In fact, it turned out to be well in our favor in terms of the terms. The total deal amount was exactly where we wanted to be in terms of the value of the company and the multiple. And we were able to secure the business with a 40% cash at close, with the balance paid out over 4 years, seller financed. So it came together very nicely.
Yeah, which I have to say is highly unusual. It happens, but highly unusual, especially today in today's market where capital markets are so wide open and banks are everywhere lending, and it's highly unusual. But that was, when you can get seller financing, it's always a good thing.
Yeah, it really worked out for us. And again, once the deal was done, and if it's premature to skip ahead, let me know. But once the deal was done, part of the seller financing aspect of it, which was interesting, and in hindsight, I don't think we fully anticipated, is that the seller remained very engaged post-close. And, we all became very good friends. We ultimately employed the seller as a consultant full-time for over 18 months. And have really, benefited from the seller financing, but also the seller's assistance in both learning the market, helping with the transition, helping with the integration, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think so much of that goes back to, and I think it's a credit to you and to the rest of the executives at Matot that, you took the right approach up front. You built a relationship, which then paid you dividends on the back end with the seller, right? He wanted to make sure that you were successful. So, and not only because he had a seller note, but there was a real relationship beyond his future payments.
Yes, and he was and is, he was extremely vested with many of the customer relationships that he had built over his tenure with the company, and he did not want to see those go by the wayside either.
Yeah.
He put a lot of time and energy into those, wanted to see those maintained, so we were grateful to have him around.
How many of the employees wound up transferring? Because you literally moved the operation from their location into yours, which was one of the deal points that made this really accretive for you, right? You had all this empty space that you could just move it into. So you got rid of all of that overhead that the owner had on his financials and merged it right into yours. But how many of the employees actually wind up coming over with the transaction?
Not including the owner, we transitioned 6 of the 8 full-time employees.
That's great.
Every single one of the employees was made a full-time offer, but 2 of them chose not to move with us.
It was a little bit of a drive, right? So it was more probably around the drive than anything else.
Correct. Some of our employees are driving over an hour, whereas they were driving 10 or 15 minutes to work before. But again, 6 out of 8 is pretty good in my book.
How involved was the management team in the diligence? So I know you had advisors in the deal and accountants. How far did you have to get into it and really peel back the onion yourselves?
Less than I would have anticipated, but enough to scare us a couple times.
Well, tell me more.
I would say that when it comes down to the 23rd hour and you're reviewing financials and you're talking to the bank and the due diligence is complete and you're discussing the financing, what I learned is that at the 11th hour, oftentimes there can be cold feet on both sides. And it's funny how in hindsight, it comes down to pennies relative to the deal size. But in the moment, it creates a ton of panic. And a lot of it's understanding return on investment, some of the fundamentals of how money works and financing works. There were no skeletons in the closet along the way. But again, it becomes very personal at the end. Banks can become as helpful as they are. They present you with a ton of information. It's a flood of paperwork. It's a lot that you're reviewing in a very short window in order to get a deal done by a targeted date. I mean, there's some stressful nights in there. I'm not going to lie about that. But again, having a good team in place, having trusted executive management in place, having owners that trust the process, having bankers that you're comfortable working with, may ultimately made the deal possible. But there were several, dicey moments in those final days getting us to close where it could have gone either way, but again, we're very fortunate that it all worked out. But it's a big deal. Acquiring a company is no small feat. And sometimes it seems easy on paper, but ultimately when you get near the end, it can still be a little scary.
So you hit on a little bit the concept of return on investment. So were there discussions internally around, what was this going to mean really at the end of the day? And how did you go about getting comfortable with that?
The sell inside to our team really revolves around the idea that we weren't buying this company to keep it the same. Our goal and where we found success ultimately was in growing the business that we bought. So we had cash in the bank that needed to be invested somewhere. And we could have done work on our shop with some CapEx, new employees, improving processes and workflow, lean manufacturing efforts. But ultimately, it made sense to go after an acquisition for some very specific financial reasons. And understanding that this money that we're investing, especially under the terms that we received, was going to lead us to the possibility of growing equity immediately, ultimately, moved us along to the close.
So talk about the integration. Did you operate in that other facility for 6 months? Is that right?
Yeah, for almost exactly 6 months, we operated in that facility.
So you were just being thoughtful and trying to figure out how to fully integrate. So how did integration go? I mean, it was great. I think you did the number one most important thing I tell people is take care of the employees. By far, they're your number one asset. Clients are very important, but your employees make the thing run every day. And so you did a great job there. But talk about the rest of the integration.
Yeah, so we initially thought we'd be in the building that we bought for a year. And that was just sort of a finger in the wind timeline when we bought the business, having not done something like this as radical before. We gave ourselves a year. But quickly, we realized as a relatively small company, and even down to things like bookkeeping and sales order processing and shipping and receiving, that it was very inefficient to be running two companies out of two separate facilities. So we accelerated that project plan, and one day woke up and said, "Hey, we gotta bring this together." And again, it's another fab shop with heavy equipment, and it just basically becomes a logistical exercise. The employees were on board by that point. We had financially motivated several of the key employees, and in this case, those were experienced welder fabricators that had been working at the company for a very long time, to take the longer drive to our main facility in Bellwood. And so we knew that we had them on board under contract. The owner was ready to have us move out of the building that we were leasing from him. And it just simply becomes a project management scenario. There's a lot of logistics involved. You're moving heavy equipment and you're trying like heck to not disrupt production, to let down any current customer orders. So we gave ourselves a window of about 10 days to do the move. There's a lot of preparation at the home facility in terms of getting new workstations set up, getting the employees set up, introducing employees to employees of the different facilities. We took a lot of very methodical steps to make that happen, but ultimately got it done in about that 10-day window once we hit the go button and tractor trailers started moving up to the facility to start loading equipment.
And Jim, the core business, the dumbwaiter business, how did that fare in the midst of all of this? Because it's a lot. I mean, you do an acquisition and then you do all of the integration planning and the moving. How did the core business fare?
It did well. It continues to do well. It's an amazing business in that business comes to us. So there was certainly, we certainly had some team members that were stretched thin because we did not add sales. We did not add inside sales support. We have not added to our accounting, finance, APAR. We have maintained the same number of back office staff to help run both product lines now. So there were some stressed out people who were run ragged, who were learning new products, who were learning new customers. But ultimately, the dumbwaiter business has not seen any decrease in business since the acquisition.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
It is.
I don't always hear that. People get so excited about the new thing and the acquisition, and sometimes the core business suffers. So that's great. How about the cultural fit? How did it work merging in these other employees with your employee base? And, were there any special things that you did around culture?
We didn't have to do as much as you might think. We took employees from our headquarters up there to work alongside this team for about a month before we moved. We also made an effort to bring employees from the new facility down to our main headquarters. We did lunches, we shared stories, but ultimately the employees were merging from two multi-generational family-run businesses, and that helped with the culture a ton. Matot has a very strong family-run culture inside its four walls with its employees. We have an average tenure on our shop floor of well over 20 years. So we don't divorce easily, we say. Employees like to work at Matot. We enjoy the employees that we have at Matot. We're a very, very fortunate group. And I think once the new employees felt that culture within Matot's walls, it was a fairly easy decision for them to come along.
That's great. So, Jim, you got a little bit of headwind here behind you. Talking to the M&A Unplugged community, for those folks out there looking to acquire a business, if you were to put a bow on all of this, what one big piece of advice would you offer to everybody?
Aside from saying go do it, I would say ensure that your motivations are agreed upon at both the ownership and executive management level before you begin. You need to ensure that your objectives are the same. Why are you going after an acquisition? Is it to grow bottom line? Is it to grow top line? Is it because you have excess capacity? I think it's worth taking a look at those questions and perhaps rating them on a 1 to 5 scale individually, and then bringing those comments and notes together to ensure that, once you get into this, everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. Because again, we were very, very fortunate, and I count ourselves as lucky as having such a strong team in place and having, almost like a laser light focus on making this a success. Because without the momentum of our key team members pushing this thing forward, I don't think it would have happened.
Jim, this is awesome. Great information, some great nuggets. One of the things I'm asking all of my guests to sort of wrap up the interview is, do you have a book, a business book, or any kind of book that you've read that really made an impact on you and moved the needle for you in your career?
This is going to sound silly, but the book that helped me the most through this transition is called M&A for Dummies, and it's by Bill Snow. He's an investment banker in the city of Chicago, and it is literally a step-by-step guide of how to buy a business, and it will carry you through the steps, teach you the lingo, teach you the language, familiarize yourself with the expectations of what's going to happen through an acquisition. And it sounds silly, and people chuckle when they see it on my shelf, but honestly, it's one of the better books out there for anyone looking to buy their first business.
So, Jim, just in case there's anybody out there in the market looking to acquire or install a dumbwaiter, or they're looking for dampers, how would people get in touch with you?
It's fairly straightforward. You can reach us at matot.com, and that's MATOT. Our damper business is sold under the Kelair dampers.com brand, and Kelair is spelled Kelair, KelairDampers.com.
Jim, thanks again so much for being on the show. Really appreciate all the information.
Domenic, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
to my community, just to summarize a few of the highlights that Jim covered. If you're out there looking to make a strategic acquisition, a couple of the key things to focus on. One, make sure you're being strategic about the acquisition and that you've got buy-in from all the executives on the team, that everybody's in alignment, because it's going to take a team to really get it done. Then when you launch and you start looking at getting into the market, make sure there's really a market there to be made. There have to be enough companies in the target market that you're looking for in order to ensure that your efforts are going to yield, or likely to yield, success. And then the last two are, and these are so important, as Jim called it, the sailboat test. When you start to meet with owners of businesses, potential sellers, you want to know that there's real motivation behind the conversation, that you're not just having a conversation for conversation's sake. And when you do meet with owners, really try to focus on building a relationship, because at the end of the day, when the parties really like and respect each other, the likelihood of being able to get something done and get past all of the issues in a transaction goes way up. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about the process of acquiring or selling a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com, or feel free to reach out to me at drinaldi@sunacquisitions.com. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.
Thank you for joining us today on M&A Unplugged. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and recommend it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want more great information on how to scale, acquire, or sell a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com.